Hello, my name is Ben Turner, and this is my final presentation for my game prototype Sharp Shell. So my chosen theme was Lost in the Woods, because the brief of this project allows us to choose between two themes that each have their own specified target audience, narrative, and overlying objectives for the player to achieve. Furthermore, my decision between the two briefs was influenced by what I thought I could achieve using each respective storyline, not only within the time frame, but given my skills. So looking into this, I felt as though I would have a much easier time doing the forest brief, as not only do I know a lot more about Irish myth, with several books at home I could work off of as reference, but also due to colour blindness it would probably be easier to make a colour scheme for the forest than the very similar and grounded colours in the Knight's theme. So this kind of helped me and influenced me to go towards the magical forest, especially when it came to elven culture and media. I've watched many shows, read many books with all of it, and I felt I'd have a lot easier time knowing the social aspects and where their culture would come from, so I thought I'd be able to implement that into the game in a much better way. Next is my concept and development. This was my mood boards and mind maps. Most of my mind maps were very primitive because we started a week late, and on top of that, I was a bit antsy at the time after having an extension from the previous time. So I mainly focused on my main character and a basic environmental idea in my head because I already knew what I wanted to make the second I got the brief. It was kind of just like I had to make some of these. So the way I went about it was I gathered as many references that I felt would be accurate towards not only an elvish character, but for the style, the fantasy clothing, and a couple things for the colours. And this, since it's an old mind map, the hat there was probably my main idea at the start because I felt like I was going to go in a much more like magical direction with it all. But in the end I decided on a much more toned down look than what I was originally going for. When it came to my mind map, I believe one side mainly focused on my mechanics and one of the unique mechanics over there. Can't particularly see, but to move on a little bit, most of this side was talking about my levels, and I think they gave me a good basis of where I would start in the actual development process for Unity, despite having little to no experience before this. Moving on to the actual concept arts themselves, this was a initial idea I had of the myth of warrior Queen Maeve. I thought she would make a good boss in the game, tying into the theme a good bit with magical aspects, as well as what I wanted to bring to the narrative with Irish myth and such. And I thought it would be a good antagonist to our protagonist of the elf. As well as this, I thought the objectives of orbs seemed a little vague. So personally I thought the orbs should actually have a reason for either being in the forest or the player needing them to get out of the forest. So I tried to tie that into the portal itself that the player will use to get out. I thought each orb could represent a way to power the portal, as in one up here being earth, which would be the frame of the portal, the fire being like a way to hone in or guide where the portal would lead, as well as just simple mana to actually power it. On top of this, I was thinking along the lines of just regular fauna and animal life and ecosystems for the forest. This was wildly overscoped at the time. I just thought I'd have a lot more time to actually focus on the little things, like something as simple as that frog hopping in the background. And then there was a simple enemy design as well, which I thought I would implement, but I didn't exactly like the style of it as I moved forward with the game. And that at the top left was a mimic character that is for the same reason as the other one. Onto the historical, cultural, and social research I did, which I did talk about a little bit already, but it more so comes from the folklore of Ireland, which is what I wanted to add to the narrative, because I felt the brief's narrative was very simple, and I felt gameplay-wise I would be able to hit that quite easily, and it was easy up until the point, but I wanted to find a way to add to the story or add to the gameplay to make the story more relevant. I couldn't end up doing that within the time frame. That was due to bad time management, which I will touch on later. But for now, I just want to delve into the actual social standings and history behind Elven culture, which I got from, sorry, I don't think I put it on this slide, but I also had the Irish myth side of things, and this is the book I had referenced. It's Lady Augusta Gregory's Irish Myths and Legends, Gods and Fighting Men. This was where I based my whole project off of, with the Children of Lear being the main myth I focused on, as I wanted my main character to actually be one of the children at the end of the journey, going back into some sort of spirit realm to reunite with the rest of their family after the curse had ended. And this solar flare that caused them to end up in this forest, I felt as narratively, I kind of wanted it to go, they were taking the portal to this realm, and it kind of cut it out and scattered the orbs across the forest. I felt that would be a good way to explain away the fact that they just got trapped here all of a sudden. Onto how I actually used the research. It was both the book and my research document itself I was just referring to back throughout the whole project. I wanted to make sure I could actually keep in time with what I thought would go well, with the theme fitting the brief and fitting what I wanted to have for the game. While I had to cut a lot of things out, I still feel as though I managed to make use of this research thanks to referring back to it constantly. This was most prevalent during the sprite creation stage, as well as the concepting stage you've seen already, as they allowed me to really scope in on what would actually be possible during this. Because during the concept stage, as I said already, I had overscoped, and then not to say I underscoped during the sprite creation stage, but I felt I really honed in on what was possible during the time frame I had left. So my pitch is Sharpshell is a 2D side-scrolling platformer that incorporates Metroidvania and precision platformer elements to make an engaging gameplay loop. That was my main goal when creating the game. So what I feel I achieved out of that, besides the basic requirements that we have here, was making sprites I was actually really proud of at the time. I've never touched on 2D pixel art before this. The only other time I'd ever done that would be the mechanics unit we had before this, and I have learnt many more tools in the time on this project than I had at all before this. I was mainly just using the penciling tool and a couple layers, but now I've managed to make, if I can find it, yes, sorry, I'll move on to that in a second. I did try to get onto animation myself. I found it hard at first because I hadn't actually gotten around to it before, but these were my main first mistakes when it came to the animation. Actually animating these outside of Unity isn't something it's something I didn't know I shouldn't have done, but now that I have the foresight, if I ever went back, I feel like I could make a lot better assets, because there's just a lot better ways to implement these that I could have went about, but I didn't feel I had the time in the end. I have been very down to the wire on this project, and to touch on that point a little more is where this comes in. I had to source sprites for enemies because I didn't feel I had time at the end to go back the same way and put the same effort in for my main character that I did already, to make 2 more enemies and a boss, which is what I was originally planning. And I got about halfway through the first enemy sprite, and it was just, I really did just understand at that point it was not realistic. And as much as I wish I could have got it done, I had to make use of this enemy mainly, which is, it was how I went through to keep on top of the brief, making sure I hit the fact that I have an enemy in the game, though this was problems within Unity that I had to face next after this, because the parallax background that I used moved on to, I don't want to touch on that yet, apologies. When it came to my main character, I think I talked about most of this already, but I think I reordered my slides by accident. I used to have the hat on them, and I used to be following a lot more on this side of things, but once I simplified the design, I thought the hair would do really well for a silhouette of a character, and I iterated on it quite a few times one with a wreath, which tied into one of the folklore books I had read. The hat, which was supposed to be more on the magical side for the forest, and a very plain design, but I settled on having white sleeves at the end of everything to make it look more tucked in and actually relevant to the character's design. In this project, I touched on a lot of new tools, to see if I can get this working here. And most of these were in Aseprite rather than Unity, because while I haven't touched Unity, I have to say, I don't think I've gained a lot of experience from it, but it's enough that I think if I went back to do this project a second time, I would have a much easier time completing the brief very quickly and then being able to actually scope in and do what I felt was necessary. Throughout the project, this is just showing off a couple new things I learned, and actually, I learned a lot more than this, but this is the things I actually did incorporate into my work, and my workflows from now on I think I'll use. My classmate Matthew had taught me just jumbling tools during the Gladiator project we had earlier with the mechanics, and I tried to make use of this and a little bit of blurring just around the edges of something like this feather, for example, to give it a little more depth when actually in Unity. Whenever moving on to titling, you saw earlier the way I had text. I drew that all by hand for the "you win" sign and things like that before even knowing about a text tool. Going back, it would probably have made my life a lot easier, and it's one of those things you learn on a project like this that I think would really help me, having known in advance, but I'm glad I've learned it and I'll be able to do this next time.